So for our warm up on our second part of completing the square, what I want for you to do is let's look at some equations with fractions. So what you need to do is solve each equation mentally. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to pause the video here, and I want you to take your time to solve each of these equations. If you can do so mentally, do so. If you need to write it out, feel free to write it out. So now what we're going to do is have a discussion as a whole class of different strategies that you use for solving each equation. And what I'm going to do is write down your solutions for each, just in case you're at home and following along, so that you can see, well, what are the solutions to each equation? So here are the solutions that you may have come up with. So if I look at number one, here's how I would have solved them. First, if I do x plus x is equal to a fourth, well, I have a little bit of difficulty solving this mentally, but I do know that if I simplify that in my head, it would be 2x equals 1/4. And then what I know that I'm also going to have to do to get rid of that 2x is divide by 2, which with fractions, instead of dividing by 2, I multiply by a half. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by half. And then I can put a denominator of 1 there to cancel. And I get x is equal to, if I'm multiplying fractions, 1 times 1 in the numerator is 1, and 4 times 2 in the denominator is 8. So for our first equation, x is equal to 1/8. For our second equation, I notice that all that I have to do is evaluate 3/2 squared. So if I'm going to evaluate 3/2 squared, I can do that in my head, but I want to show you my thought process. So 3/2 squared is 3/2 times 3/2. Let me just separate that. Then multiplying the numerators, 3 times 3 is 9. And multiplying the denominators, 2 times 2 is 4. So for our third problem, 3/5 plus x is equal to 9/5. I actually do solve this mentally so that I notice, well, what do I need to add to 3/5 to make it 9/5? And then I know the denominator when I add fractions is the same. And then I have to say, well, 3 plus what number is 6? And I know that the numerator, or 3 plus what number is 9? And what number does x have to be? Well, that's 6. You could also solve this by subtracting 3/5 from both sides. So if I take 3/5 and minus 3/5, that would make 0. And then 9/5 minus 3/5 is 6/5. Either way is okay. And then for our last one, we have 1/12 plus x equals 1/4. So in my head, I kind of know, well, I'm going to have to subtract 1/12, but if I'm subtracting 1/12 from 1/4, I'm going to have to find a common denominator. So the common denominator between 4 and 12, the least common denominator is going to be 12, because 4 is a factor of 12, or 4 can be multiplied out to be 12. So if I multiply the denominator by 3, to not change the fraction, I have to multiply the numerator by 3. So we have 1/12 plus x equals 3/12. And then in my head, I subtract 1/12 from both sides. And x would equal 2. And I forgot to put the 12 there. So 2 out of 12. Then I'm looking at that's a nice answer. X could equal 2/12. But you can also simplify that. 2/12 can be simplified to 1/6. So this also could equal 1/6. So I just wanted to show that work process for you as well. All right, so we're going to have to solve some more difficult problems by completing the square. So first of all, for number 1, I'm going to model that. That is not set up where we have a middle term equals a number and we can divide by 2 and figure that out. So the first one I'm actually going to have to distribute. So if I do this, x times x is x squared. And then x times 1, I'm going to add 1x. Negative 3 times x, I'm going to minus 3x. And negative 3 times 1, I'm going to minus 3. And then that's equal to 5. Then here, 1 minus 3, we have x squared minus 2x minus 3 is equal to 5. Now, if you remember this, completing the square process, we got the x squared and the x term on the left. Then we moved the constant term to the right. So I'm going to do so by adding 3 to both sides. So we have x squared minus 2x is equal to 8. So in drawing a picture, I have x squared here, which is going to be x and x. And then if I have negative 2x, I'm going to split that into equal parts and have negative 1x on both sides. And I write the coefficient of negative 1 because it helps. And then here, if I pull that out, that's minus 1 and minus 1. And then negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides to make this equation a perfect square. And then if you notice on the outside, I have x minus 1 times x minus 1. So in standard form, to convert that into factored form, that's going to be x minus 1 squared is equal to, the right side of the equation is 8 plus 1, which is 9. So if I take the square root of both sides, we have x minus 1 is equal to, well, the square root of 9 is 3. So I have 3. If you remember, that's half the solutions. I always write plus or minus 3 to remind myself that there are 2 possible answers. Then I split them up into both solutions. So x minus 1 is equal to 3, and x minus 1 is equal to negative 3. Then I add 1 to both sides. For the first equation, I get x equals 4. And adding 1 here, negative 3 plus 1, I get x equals negative 2. So I'm going to pause the video, give you some time to complete 2 and 3 with groups, or so now would be group work time or individual time. And then later, I'm going to post answers. So now just pause, work with your groups on this completing the square process. So here are the solutions for 2 and 3. Note for number 2, if you had x equals 0.25 and x equals negative 3 over 4. So now we're going to transition into some more difficult equations with completing the square. So I'm going to model the first one, and then I'm going to leave you to a challenge to solve that one. So first, I have a combination of factors and then a constant equal to 0. So I'm going to distribute. 7 times 3 is 21. 7 times negative x is minus 7x. Negative x times 3, I'm going to minus 3x. And negative x times negative x is plus x squared. Then I'm going to add 3, and that's going to equal 0. So now I'm going to collect my like terms and put it in standard form. So x squared is my only squared term. So I have x squared. I'm going to cross it out. My x terms, negative 7x minus 3 more x is minus 10x. And then 21 plus 3 is plus 24. And then that's going to equal 0. For our completing the square process, we're going to subtract 24 from both sides. So we have x squared minus 10x is equal to negative 24. Now remember, we have x squared minus 10x. I'm going to split that. If I draw a picture here, I have x squared. And then the negative 10x, I'm going to split into 2 equal parts. So minus 5x and minus 5x. So here I have x minus 5 and x minus 5. And then what I'm going to add to both sides is -5 times -5, which is 25. So adding 25 to both sides. I notice on the left, I'm going to have x minus 5 squared. And on the right-hand side of the equation, -4 plus 25 is 1. So now what I'm going to do is take the square root of both sides. And I'm going to get x minus 5 equals, square root of 1 is 1, but as a reminder, I have plus or minus. So I like to write the plus or minus operator and then split it up into two equations. So x minus 5 equals 1 and x minus 5 equals -1. Both equations I add 5, so I'm going to add 5 and add 5. So 1 plus 5, I get x equals 6. And adding 5 here, I get x equals 4. So now I'm going to pause and give you time to complete number 5 with a group, and then we're going to discuss solutions. And then I'll post answers. So the answers to number 5, x equals -0.7 and x equals -0.9. So for our next task, we're actually going to look for errors in completing the square. So these problems have errors. So if I have x squared plus 14x equals -24, just a reminder, I'm going to draw my picture because that helped. We have x squared. And then 14x, I would have 7x and 7x. And I would get x plus 7 squared on the outside. But they added 28. So I'm going to look here. And 7 times 7 should be 49. So my mistake here, they need to add 49. So I'm going to go work through and look for mistakes in the other ones. So this worked out a little bit differently. So what they did here, I'm actually going to move the 16 over to be -16. And then it looks like here, from 16 to 25, they added, to make 25, they added 9 and they added 9. And the difference between here, if I do the -10 into 2 parts method, we have x squared, and then -10 into 2 parts is -5x and -5x. So we would have x minus 5 and x minus 5 squared. And then -5 times -5 is 25. So they added 25, and the difference between -16 and 9 is adding 25. So far we're good. So we have x minus 5 squared equals 9. And then when I take the square root, I see an error. The square root of 9 should be 3. So there's my error. Those should be 3. So I'm going to write big over here, the square root of 9 equals 3, not 9 and -9. So I'm going to leave you to find the errors for 3 and 4 and leave that a little bit open-ended. Once you are finished, you can fill in the rest of the solutions and go to your assignment.